Hey friends, welcome back. Miss Dable here. We are going to be reading chapter 3 of Gooney Bird Greene by Lois Lowry. Last time we talked, we discussed the difference between fiction, fake, and nonfiction, real facts. So, do you think this book is fiction, a fake story, or nonfiction, true facts? If you guessed fiction, you are correct. This is a fake story, a make-believe story with a make-believe character. So this story is fiction. Let's get into chapter 3. On Friday, Gooney Bird Greene was wearing capri pants, a satin tank top, a long string of pearls. I brought a long string of pearls. We're getting fancy now with our props. Her red hair was twisted into one long braid, which was decorated with plastic flowers. There were flip-flops on her feet. "You look beautiful," Keiko said to Gooney Bird in admiration. "Yes, I know," Gooney Bird replied. "Thank you." She walked to the front of the classroom, where Mrs. Pigeon told her it was time. Malcolm was in the back of the classroom. He was at his desk writing, "I will never put anything in my nose," 100 times on a piece of paper. Remember back in chapter 1, he stuck the origami up his nose. Not good. The nurse told him that he needed to write that on lined paper. She said it would keep his hands busy. "How come Gooney Bird gets to stand up in front of the class?" Malcolm asked. "Shh," said everybody, except for Felicia Ann, said to Malcolm, "Listen." "Today," Gooney Bird said, "I have a very exciting story to tell you. In my story, there's a long journey, a mystery, and a rescue." Mrs. Pigeon, seated at her desk, had begun correcting some spelling papers. She looked up. "Listen, second graders," she said. "Hear the different things that Gooney Bird is putting into her story. That is what good storytellers do." Gooney Bird listened patiently to the teacher. Then she stood straight up and did some breathing exercises. Why don't we take a deep breath here together right now? Breathe in and breathe out. We practice that in class a lot. It helps us to relax, right? So anytime you feel kind of stressed or anxious or overwhelmed, you can always take a deep breath, and it will help you feel calm. "All right, I'm ready to begin," she said at last. "The title of this story is How Gooney Bird Came from China on a Flying Carpet." "Just like Aladdin," Barry Tuckerman said. "Barry, please pay attention," Gooney Bird said. "I like to have absolutely all eyes on me." Then, when the class became silent, all except Felicia Ann, who had been sitting silently all along, almost all eyes, even Miss Pigeon's, were on her. She began. How Gooney Bird Came from China on a Flying Carpet. Once upon a time, last month, Mr. and Mrs. Greene decided to take their little girl Gooney Bird and move away from the place where they had always lived. Touch your head if you've ever moved to a new place before. Yeah, sometimes it can be scary and different, but change is good. It helps us to grow. They had always lived in China, but now Mr. Greene had a new job. His job was in Water Tower. "That's here," Chelsea said. "I live in Water Tower." Gooney Bird stopped talking. She arranged the pearl necklace so it was draped over one shoulder. "Me too," Tricia said. "We all live in Water Tower," Ben pointed out. "That's why we go to Water Tower Elementary." "Class," Miss Pigeon warned. "Miss Pigeon," Gooney Bird said politely, "let me take care of this." "Children," she said in a firm voice, "I cannot tell a story if I am constantly interrupted. There will be time for questions and comments. Please raise your hand if you want to say something. It is very distracting when you call out." "Sorry," Tricia said. "Sorry," Chelsea said. "Sorry," Ben added. The class waited. Gooney Bird looked up at them sternly, and she did some more breathing exercises, and then she began. They had always lived in China, but now Mr. Greene had a new job, and his new job was in Water Tower. So they packed up carefully. It took many days. Mr. Greene had to pack 43 sets of false teeth. Then Mrs. Greene had to pack her dancing shoes and bathing suits. and Gooney had to pack all of her belongings, which included a money collection. Finally, their furniture was loaded into a moving van. The Greene family waved goodbye as the moving van drove away from China and started its long journey to Water Tower. Gooney stopped. Every child in the classroom had their hand raised. Even Miss Pigeon was waving her arm. "I'll have an intermission now for questions," Gooney said. "Chelsea, you first." What was something you were wondering? If Gooney was telling that story, what was a question that you had? I know my question in my head that I didn't understand. Let's see if it's the same. Chelsea asked, "Why did Mr. Greene have to pack 43 pairs of false teeth?" Chelsea asked. The false teeth are not part of this story. That was my question too. Why does he have so many teeth? Gooney said, "Malcolm?" Malcolm looked up from his desk. "I will not put anything in my nose," was written all over his paper. His eyes were very wide. Show me your wide eyes. "Tell me about the money collection," he said. "That's a different story," Gooney said. "Beanie, what's your question?" "When are you going to tell us about the prince and the diamonds?" Beanie asked. Gooney thought it over. "On Monday I'll tell it," she said. "Now there's time for one more question before I continue. Miss Pigeon, did you have your hand raised?" Miss Pigeon nodded. "Gooney she said in a nice voice, "you have an amazing imagination. We think you are wonderful at telling stories, don't we, class?" She looked around and all the children nodded. "Show me how you nod." She nodded. "But I want to be certain that the children understand these are made-up stories. So I want to point out," "No," Gooney said. "My stories are all absolutely true." "I want to point out," Miss Pigeon said, "of course we all know that China is a foreign country, all the way across the ocean, and that the moving van could never drive from China to Water Tower." Gooney rearranged her pearls and sighed. "Miss Pigeon," she said, "why don't we take a few minutes for research? Is there an atlas in the bookcase?" Miss Pigeon laughed and said, "Of course." She went over to the bookcase and took out a book of maps that's called an atlas. "Now," said Gooney "would you find out if there are any other Chinas?" "Other Chinas? I don't think—" Miss Pigeon began turning pages of the atlas. She found an index at the back. We know what an index is, right? Index is at the back of nonfiction books. It tells you a word and what page in the book you can find that. "My goodness," Miss Pigeon said. "There is a China in Texas." "Correct," said Gooney "And what else?" "There is a China in Maine." "Correct," said Gooney "And?" "California. There's a China Lake. Oh my goodness, and look, North Carolina." "And now it's time to continue the story," Gooney announced. "Where were we? Oh, yes, I remember. The moving van had just left China." She took the story up again. After the moving van left China, the Greene family loaded up their station wagon with 5 big suitcases. They added their lawnmower that they had forgotten to put in the moving van, and a cooler full of ham sandwiches and iced tea, a bundled up stack of National Geographic magazines, and an orange and white cat named Catman, who had no tail because he had flicked it into the former tail which once was under the lawnmower. The last thing they put in the station wagon was a rolled up rug from the front porch in their house. It was too long to fit. They tried it sideways. They folded it upside down, but it still wouldn't fit. "Let's just leave it behind," Mr. Greene suggested. But then Mrs. Greene began to cry. "It was my mother's rug," she said. "There's a stain on it where my mother spilled her black bean soup 40 years ago. I feel sentimental about this rug." Can you say that word? Sentimental? Sentimental is something that has very deep meaning for you, something very, very important. Something sentimental to me is I have a mug, a coffee mug that my mom gave to me. It's very special and it says I love you on it. And since my mom lives far away, I don't get to see her all the time. So when I drink coffee in that mug every morning, it makes me feel special and remember her. So that is something sentimental. Think about something sentimental to you. What is something very special? So Mrs. Greene agreed that they would take the rug. His wife cried, and he started crying too. He decided to put it back in the window of the station wagon so the end, rolled up, would stick out. He made certain that everything was nicely arranged and that Catman had a comfortable place to sleep on the back seat, just beneath the end of the rug and next to the place where Gooney would sit. Mr. Greene and Mrs. Greene and Gooney all got into the car and drove away from China, and they started their long journey to Water Tower. They drove for many, many hours. They ate all of the ham sandwiches and drank all of the iced tea. They stopped to get gas. They went and pulled over to the bathroom. They played the car radio and listened to the news and operas and football games and talk shows and about relationships. Suddenly, Gooney glanced down and noticed that Catman had disappeared. She looked all around on the floor in the back seat, but Catman was not there. She heard a small sound like a purr coming from inside of the rolled up rug. She knew that Catman had entered the rug. He probably found a warm, cozy place. But Gooney was worried about Catman, so she decided to get him out. She reached into the rolled up center of the rug, but he slithered away beyond her hands. She looked at the back of her parents' head, wondering if she should tell them about the problem with Catman. Her mother was dozing off, and her father was driving, watching the road very carefully and listening to a radio program about whales. So Gooney decided to wiggle into the rug herself and rescue Catman. "Oh no!" Kiko cried. "I'm going to faint." "Shh," said the children. "We're listening to the story." It was dark and dusty and a very tight squeeze inside the rolled up rug. But Gooney wiggled inch by inch toward Catman. Catman slithered away inch by inch, but she could see his glittering eyes as he backed away from her. Gooney was determined that she would rescue him. She continued forward. Suddenly, an amazing thing happened. Even though Gooney was not very large and did not weigh very much and was not wearing her heavy diamond earrings from the palace that day, her weight inside the rolled up rug caused it to tilt. At that moment, Mr. Greene leaned forward to change the radio station, and the car went over a pothole in the road. The rolled up rug, with both Catman and Gooney slid out of the back window, flew through the air, and landed on the side of the road in some thick grass. A cow was chewing on a purple flower. He looked curiously at them and then wandered away. The station wagon drove on, around. Catman's fur was standing up on edge, and the rug slowly unrolled on the side of the road. Even if he had his tail would have been sticking straight up in the air. For that moment, Catman stood still, looking at Gooney and then he ran away very fast. Gooney sat up. She was not very sure what happened, but she was not hurt. She simply wondered where her family was, and where her cat was, and where the car was. The other cars stopped and people got out. Many people offered her a drink of water, but Gooney wasn't very thirsty. After a while, the police car with flashing lights came, and a TV reporter and a cameraman. While the policeman talked to her on his radio, and the TV reporter, a woman with large hair, interviewed Gooney and called her the little girl who had a flying carpet ride. In the interview, Gooney decided that Gooney described Catman and asked people to call the station if they found him, but she never got Catman back. Eventually, the police car took her to her parents, who were both crying at a gas station about 4 miles down the road. When Gooney Bird and her parents were finally reunited, everyone, including the two policemen, the TV reporter, the gas station owner, hugged, kissed, and did a tango. The end. What a lovely story, Miss Pigeon said, and exciting too, but also a little sad that you lost your kitty that way. Catman's not a kitty, Gooney Bird said. He's a cat, and I didn't say I lost him. I just said I never got him back. So no one found him and called the TV station? Actually, they did, Gooney Bird replied. But where is Catman now? Miss Pigeon asked. He was consumed by a cow, Gooney Bird said, but that was a different story. A cow? You're joking, Miss Pigeon said. No, said Gooney Bird, I'm not joking. I only tell absolutely true stories. Tell it, the children said. I will, said Gooney Bird, but that is another day. And that's the end of chapter 3. I'll see you soon.